Hi, friends. Shug here with Women's Hot Topics. Sadly, some hot topics are ones that we have to discuss because of current events. Today, we're going to talk about how to survive a mass shooting. And I think it's important with this tough conversation that we be aware of any young children's ears that might be in the room or might be listening. This is hot. This is a hot topic as of today, and I think it's impacting all of us, all ages. Now, I encourage you moms and dads to listen through the viewpoint of how can you be teaching your kids how to stay safe as well as yourself. It's simple. This topic is very simple. To give you the knowledge and the skills to stay alive in a mass shooting or an active shooter situation. There's a quote from Simon Osamoh that says, preparedness is not paranoia, it's protection. And we need to talk about that today. And that is our guest. I am honored to have Simon Osamoh with us. Welcome, Simon, to the show.
Look, it's always an honor and a privilege. I think this could be my third or fourth time on your show. So really grateful for you allowing me to, as you mentioned, share this important subject with your audience.
Yes. And the other shows we've done are on de-escalation, et cetera. And you guys know I do prison ministry with our team and our mentors. And Simon's wife has been on our team as a mentor in the past. And it's important that we talk about these topics. If you are on YouTube, you will see below the show numbers that we will post that Simon has been on. But welcome. I just want to give a small glimpse of his extremely impressive experience that he has. Simon is a British, if you could tell by his lovely accent, Simon is a British American security expert and a former counterterrorism head at the Mall of America. A seasoned British detective turned author. He's trained thousands, friends, thousands in active shooter survival and helps communities prepare for the unthinkable. Simon is the founder of Kingswood Security Consulting and a nationally recognized voice in preventing violence. And that's what today's show is about, keeping yourself safe. If you want to get a hold of them, I'm going to get this right off of the top. Please go to team@kingswoodsc.com, team@kingswoodsc.com, or go to his website at kingswoodsc.com, and you'll find information there. So thank you, Simon, for coming on. And if you would just share with us a little bit about why you wrote this book and how this got started. How to survive a mass shooting.
Yeah, thank you, Shug. So it was around, the journey actually started around 3 years ago. As you know, my eldest son has just become a teenager, but we were talking one day, they did an active shooter drill at his school, and he was telling me what had happened. And the drill started, the teacher locked the door, he went to his desk, and then he started to type on his computer, and he asked all the kids to go in the corner of the room. And there sat the teacher for 5 minutes, catching up on homework, on testing, whatever he was doing. And the kids were sat in the corner thinking, what is going on here? And obviously, Sugar, as you've introduced me, my sons had the misfortune of being the sons of a security expert. I said to my son, no, that isn't a drill, that isn't testing, that isn't training, that isn't really helping you. And I actually reached out to a superintendent of my son's school district. And I was quite stern and said, if this is what you're teaching my son, I'm not too sure that he really should be going through these drills. And we had a series of conversations, and the superintendent assured me that things would change. But it started on this journey, Shug, to better understand how are we educating people in the moment to stay safe. And then during this journey, I met a woman called Meredith Eliza Day, strong Christian woman. Her only son, Nicholas, goes by Nick, was 14 years old. And I get goosebumps, Shug, telling the story, but 14 years old, he was killed at a school shooting in Roxborough High School in Philadelphia in 2022. Her only son was killed at the one place that was due to protect him, the place where he should have been safe, where he went for education. And when Meredith told me the story, she was crying, I was crying, and it really inspired me to say, perhaps the Lord has given me a platform to be able to share the knowledge. It's really inspired me to saying, I think we need to go back to the basics, and we need to make sure that families, children, and members of our community and members of our churches actually know what to do in the moment, because through my research I found a lot of people didn't know what to do. So that was why the name of the book was very simple: How to Survive a Mass Shooting. And as you mentioned, Shug, it's really to give people the tips and tools that in that moment they know that they can persevere, they can overcome, but they need to know what to do. And I think as a society right now, as you mentioned, with so much violence and the devil encroaching in all our lives, I don't think we're doing enough to educate. So I'm hoping that the book is going to give the people the wisdom to know that they can persevere and overcome these tragic circumstances.
Well, the book's timing is providence from the Lord. I'm very confident in that. And
Yeah.
I have seen you on TV addressing the latest mass shooting at the Church of Annunciation, where innocent children were victims during a mass that they were conducting, a Catholic mass,
Yeah.
and they were in prayer. And this evil shooter, and it's only the devil himself, as far as I'm concerned,
Yes.
is turned against children and has decided to attack. And I think what's important is that there are school-wide trainings that can be conducted by students and faculty. And that's what you address as well as your book. Even more recent, the Charlie Kirk assassination at the Utah Valley University. Thousands of students were in attendance to witness this heinous murder. Evil is not hiding, friends, all the more today. The timing of this book, like I had said, is remarkable. How to Survive a Mass Shooting. And it answered a lot of prayers and questions that I had. So you talk in the beginning of the book, and I don't want to address it right now, but I want to get everybody a familiarity with what the book covers. You talk about the difference between an active shooter and a mass shooter and why this is important. You talk about situational awareness and the importance of that being a daily practice for you. It's not reserved for moments of crisis. It's something that you need to do every single day. Can you talk a little bit about situational awareness?
Yeah, and so the key piece in situational awareness, and you when you introduced the podcast, Shug, you summed it up well. But we're talking about leading with preparedness, not with fear. So these events are high impact, but they're also low probability of ever occurring. But we're definitely seeing these events becoming more common. So we've got to lead with preparedness, not with fear. And what we want to do is just build templates in our daily lives. So in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I reside, North America, where I used to work, tragically in 2019, I believe it was, there was a 5-year-old that was, the mall has 3 levels, and there was a 5-year-old that was thrown over the third floor level by someone with profound mental illness. Act of God that this 5-year-old survived, because he must have fallen 80 feet and landed on a tile floor. Act of God. But it's put in simple situations and applying templates. So what I said to my 2 sons after that happened is, when you go to Mall of America, because we know this bad thing has happened, rather than walking by the sort of the edge where you have the gap, is walk alongside the sides of the building. And actually, my youngest son just turned 12 this August. We went to Mall of America as a family, and I was course correcting them as they're walking around, saying that you don't stand there by the edges, you stand by the buildings. And what happens over time, Shug, as you build these situational awarenesses, but you start doing them without really thinking about it, and you're putting these layers of protection in. So as an example, my family, when we go to restaurants, we always sit in the cheap seats. The cheap seats are where? They're by the restrooms, they're by the kitchen. The reason being, if you're in a restaurant, generally the kitchen has a door which leads outside. So we need to leave a restaurant quickly. We sit close to the kitchen because then we can try and get out that exit door. So we now do that. My sons and wife, we now do that without even thinking about it. When we go to a movie theater, where do we sit again? My sons hate it. We sit in the cheap seats. Where are the cheap seats? That's at the front row where you get the crick neck. Why do we do that? Because normally the emergency exits are at the front of the movie theater. So if we need to get out quickly, we can go through those exits. So the situational awareness isn't about leading with fear. It's about leading with preparedness. And that preparedness is just looking at the environment that you're in and saying for 5-10 seconds, if I had to leave quickly, where would I go? What would it look like? If I had to hide where I am now, where would I go? What would that look like? And then once you've moved past that, you can then enjoy the movie, the grocery store, wherever you are. but you're building this situational awareness that you know that the devil is coming to devour, and we know these bad things are happening. And in that moment, if it ever happens to me, what am I going to do? So we have to, in this current year, we have to start building those templates of situational awareness. And it's really just thinking about what is the environment that I'm going to, what is the best way to stay safe, and then doing that consistently over and over again. And you, Shug, you know my two young sons, but they do these things now without even thinking about it, just because they've had the templates there. So
Yes.
that's what I really encourage is lead with preparedness, not with fear. Think of your environment and work out what are those templates you need to do consistently, time and time again, to build your readiness that if something does happen, you have a plan.
You know, as a father of two wonderful boys, how do you approach this conversation? I mean, you know, we don't want to have the kids living in fear all the time, but then also we want them to be prepared. Can you just briefly share with us what you have found has worked?
Yes. And so it's interesting. So I'll give the game away here. Your people on YouTube will see my gray hairs, but I'm 47 years old. And if you take from Virginia Tech, which I think was 97, 98, I believe it was, that's when America, us as a society, said we need to do more about these school shootings. We need to do more about these mass shootings in schools. And then everyone started to have active shooter and lockdown training. So quite often, Shug, it's people of me and your generation when we're saying, how are these young kids going to respond? But often the data is that they're being trained at school. As I mentioned, my 11-year-old, he's now 14, but 11-year-old at the time, one of my inspirations for the book was what he told me about what was going on in school. So he's lived his life having drills. My youngest son, who's 12, he's lived his life having drills. So if someone is born post, I think Virginia Tech was 98, someone might, your listeners might correct me, but anyone past 1998 has been raised practically in a world where these shootings are becoming more common. So what I often say to parents is, it's a difficult subject for us, perhaps not so much for our kids. So I think we have to overcome that barrier that we do need to have these open conversations. We do need to be transparent with our kids. We don't want to lead with fear, but we want to say to our kids that if something is to happen, I just want to make sure that you've thought about what is your plan. Can we talk through some of those options? So for our generation, Shug, most often we have the issue. Anyone born after 1998, Virginia Tech, has been raised with lockdown drills. So we often have to overcome the own obstacles that we have about how it's affecting our children. They're already affected because most states have laws as to how many drills sort of have to take place. So I don't know if that makes sense to the Shug, but that's what I found my experience is. It's us as the parents, we're more concerned than our children are because tragically they're being raised in a time when these are becoming more common. Yeah.
I would have never guessed when I was raising my kids that this would be the landscape of today. But you're right. And I think that prayer is powerful, friends. Pray, pray, pray in your families. Pray with your children. Don't pray in fear, but pray in victory, because that's where we stand in Jesus Christ. And I think also, like in the beginning, we had talked about practice preparedness, not paranoia. And I think that gives them rest or peace as well. Hey, you're practiced. You're ready. We're doing the best that we can to get through these challenging times. In major cities, you discussed in your book that the average response time from police is 7 to 20 minutes, but the average duration of a shooter incident is under 12 to 15 minutes. Often the shooter has finished before help arrives. Share with us what we can do during that gap of time.
Yeah. So, and we take the Anti-Nation school shooting, which happened in the year of recording this podcast. The early reports seem to be that it took the Minneapolis Police Department between 4 to 5 minutes to get there. And obviously, we know 4 to 5 minutes is a lifetime. And there's a saying that I use, Shug, and I say, and actually I just met a friend and told us at lunch, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. When seconds count, the police are minutes away. And in those minutes before the good guys arrive, an awful lot can happen. So what that tells us, and I talk about this in the book, is we are our own first responder. We have to own those first 4 to 5 minutes or longer, depending on how rural we're in, before the good guys come and help us. So that's the first point I'd want to make is we need to own those first 4 to 5 minutes, because when seconds count, the police are minutes away.
Mhm.
The second thing, and I sort of course corrected this a little bit in the book, Shug, about the run, hide, fight. There can be a lot of misconceptions about run, hide, fights, and perhaps some of your listeners have this as well. So I'll just sort of go through those briefly. So
Please.
Run, Hide, Fight was a program already let me go back, after Sandy Hook in 2012, when 26 children and teachers lost their life. Obama was the president at the time, and he said to the FBI, we've got to do something. We've got to find a program that we can teach people. The Houston Police Department were already using Run, Hide, Fight. The FBI liked it, and that became the national campaign that we still know to this day. I think what happened is we lost our way a little bit on Run, Hide, Fight and how we train it. And I course correct in the book that most people will hear run, they hear hide, and they hear fight, and they consider this to be an order. And it's not an order, it's a menu depending on the adverse situation that you find yourself in. So for those people that are listening to the podcast and watching on YouTube, I'm in a room and I have one door in front of me. If an active assailant comes through a door, I can't run, I can't hide. My only option is to fight. So I like to emphasize the fact that this is a menu depending on the adverse situation that you're in. Sometimes we can program our brain to say, well, I must run first, I must hide second, I must fight last. So that's the first point. This is a menu. It's not an order. The second thing we often find, I'll just go through them briefly, Shug, and then you can stop me if you want any more points, is when we're talking about running, obviously, if we can run away from the danger, we're going to run as far as we can. We're not going to look back. We're just going to keep running until we know we're safe. We know tragically that a lot of these mass shooters are a math equation, distance over time. They want to kill as many people in the shortest amount of distance, in the shortest amount of time. So we're going to do simple things. I talk about this in the book, Shug. We know we're going to run in zigzags. We're going to make it hard for us to be hit because this person's going to have, they're going to be fixated on a target, and we're going to make ourselves more difficult to hit. So when we run as fast as we can, we're not going to look back, and we're going to run in a zigzag to give ourselves a chance to make it harder. When we hide, the important thing to remember is often cover is protection, and concealment means that you're behind something where the bullets can't get through. And this is often where people fall short. And we see this in like the 1980s and 1990s cop movies where the cop's chasing the bad guy. He goes behind his door and he's shooting back at the bad guy. Well, that's cover. That isn't concealment. The bad guy might not be able to see him, but the bullets can still go through. So when we're hiding, we want to get behind a locked door. We want to barricade that door. And we've got to consider, is this cover or is this concealment? So big, thick walls, concrete walls, having lots of rooms between us and the assailant, lots of just things that can give us an added layer of protection. Because if we're just looking for cover, the assailant can just shoot through those walls. So we're looking for concealment. So when people are looking for places to hide, think about rooms that have brick walls, multiple brick walls, and then you're behind being barricaded. So it's got to be a locked door. And we've got to be looking for concealment to add extra layers. The fight aspect is often challenging for people because of the very nature of the term fight. But the data shows, I think since 1966 to the current day, if the FBI call a mass shooting of 4 or more people being killed, there's been around a 201, 202. So it's not a significantly high number, but it's a higher number than any of us in society would ever want to happen. Of those 201, 202, around 10% of those have been stopped by someone who is unarmed, that has just said, not today, I'm not going to allow this to happen. So if we're hiding, we're not just going to hide in the corner. Like I said, my son was doing, the teacher was doing homework. We're going to hide and say, if someone comes through that door, what can we use to try and subdue the attacker? Chairs, desks, cell phones we can throw at them, plants, whatever it can be, TV screens, our map books. So if we're hiding, we're going to think about, if we need to transition to fight, what does that look like? And then when we're in the fight stage, this is a fight like your life depends on it. Now, and I think I've said this on one of your podcast episodes before, Shug, the Marines say the body cannot go when a mind hasn't been. The body cannot go when a mind hasn't been. For me, as a protector my entire life, it hurts to the core to think that I might have to cause harm on another human being. However, in this situation, I need to imagine what that would look like, because a lot of people say, well, Simon, I don't think I can do it. but we've got to go there a little bit psychologically to say, I need to do everything possible to stop and subdue this assailant. So we have to sort of imagine what the fight would look like. The Marines say the body cannot go where the mind hasn't been. We have minutes or seconds to figure this stuff out. Now is the time to wrestle with scripture. Now is the time to wrestle with theology. Now is the time to wrestle with how I've been raised as a man, to say, could I put myself in a position where I need to cause harm on another individual? That isn't when you're in the moment. I need to think about that stuff now and what it looks like. So that's just, I'll let you come back, Shug, with any questions, but that's sort of run, hide, fight. I think we've resequenced it to this is a menu. It's not an order.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And all of your points are mentioned in your book in detail with even more examples and information, which are very helpful. You know what I found interesting, and I want to talk about these next two items. You talk about loss of fine motor skills and cognitive function under stress. I didn't even think of that. You know, you freeze, whatever. So, I'm going to let you talk about that. And then also let's talk about your breathing and the impact it makes.
Yeah. So the first thing, and we saw this tragedy in 2012 at Sandy Hook. And I use this in my training. All the teacher had to do was go to the door, press one of those little buttons, and the door would lock. All the teacher had to do was walk to the door, press the little button, and the door would lock. That seems very simple when we look back at it. However, when there is screaming, when there is gunfire, when you know young children are being murdered, that is very hard to do, because the first thing we do under stress is we lose our fine motor skills, and then we lose our gross motor skills. And I'm not going to get technical on what they are, but I'm sure most of you know that when you're under stress, you lose your inability to do day-to-day functions. You know, you forget things. When I was at Mall of America, my security officers used to have a test, and I would run them up the 9 levels at Mall of America for 20 minutes. They'd be physically exhausted. Then I would then ask them questions that are on the test, and they would get them wrong, not because they didn't know the answer, but because they were so physically exhausted, their mental state. So this is very similar. So what we can do here, Shug, again, what we mentioned earlier on situational awareness is those repetitions of the drill. Practice things under stress to say, I'm going to do the same thing over and over again. That's how we can improve our fine and gross motor skills, because it's almost like that 1980s Rolodex. We've got the information to recall. So we are going to lose our fine and gross motor skills during times of stress. How we can overcome that is practicing that consistency time and time again, doing the same actions. The second thing that you'd mentioned, Shug, then is about the breathing, is that to try and sort of level set the adrenaline rush and the different emotions we're going to have. It seems very strange and very simple, but it's just taking that big deep breath, level setting, and saying, I heard an English guy once talking about run, hide, fight. What is the best option for me to do now in this situation? Taking 3 or 4 seconds and then making action. So taking that big deep breath is very simple, but it's going to try to stabilize some of the hormones that you're going to have in the adrenaline to allow you to think clearer. Because you know, emotion clouds judgment. So what we have to try and do is remove all that emotion from it and just say, I'm in this challenging situation. How am I going to overcome? So we've got to make sure, you know, emotion can cloud our judgments. We've got to just take that big deep breath. Only 3 to 5 seconds, that's all you need. And you're going to be able to level set and say, I heard an English guy talk about this once. What is the best option? My best option right now is to hide. I'm going to go to the door. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to barricade. I'm going to look for another way out. So those 2 things, Shug, yeah.
Great. Good points. And, you know, you mentioned taking a breath. We're going to take a breath for a second right now. Friends, I know listening to this might be overwhelming, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening in this world. You know, you just want to go and move to the moon and not worry about it. But I got to tell you, God tells us in John 16:33, Jesus says, in the world, you will have tribulation. Friends, we have to just know that. We live in a sinful world, and you will have tribulation. But Jesus says, but take heart. I have overcome the world. You have an assurance of victory in Jesus Christ, friends, when you believe in him, Christ alone. Don't forget, in all circumstances, that God is with you. He has already won the battle over sin. And God reminds us that He is in this crazy world with us. Be still and know I'm God. And so this is a perfect time to pray with your family, with your children, with your spouses, and just bring the level down, have trust that God will guide you, research and discover how to survive a mass shooting, and know that God is in control. Be still and know I'm God. Now, denial is another thing that you talk about in your book. Oh, it's not going to happen in my small town, etc. Well, we have a friend who lives in Anaconda, Montana, where the shooter lived right next door to a bar, and he came in and shot up the bar in the early morning hours. And you just don't know when it's going to happen or where it's going to happen. So I want you to know, it doesn't matter how far away you live. These are all things that you need to be aware of. Now, let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit if we could, Simon. Let's talk about high risk individuals. What are some of the common traits of a mass shooter?
Yeah, so the mass shooting data is really strong in certain areas. So um, um, these are Caucasian people, predominantly male, and when you look at the profile of mass shooters in general, they lean towards the sort of late 20s, late 30s. Obviously, the school shooters, the data is early because a lot of those persons are insiders. So most often it'd be a white Caucasian male, late 20s, early 30s. But the sort of physical appearance, Shug, for me as a sort of a crime researcher, it's more important to understand the makeup of who these individuals are. That there's a really great organization. There's a fellow British American here living in Minnesota, Dr. James Densley, a good friend of mine from an organization called the Violence Project. They've researched every mass shooting from 1966 to the current day. And there's sort of four traits that these mass shooters all have in common. And they've suffered sort of trauma and abuse. They're suffered from suicidality, even the time of carrying out a mass attack or immediately before. So it's those type of behaviors that we should really go looking for as people in our society as to how can we help those individuals. For me as a Christian, I believe that God created us in His own image, and God had a plan for my life long before I arrived. So for that, I don't believe that God wanted these people to be carrying out these attacks. So when we know that these are people that are suicidal, that have been in crisis or abusive relationships, there's this pathway to violence. They have a fascination with other mass shooters. Those are the type of behaviors and things that we can look at and we can do something about, rather than looking for a physical appearance, is looking for those people that appear to be struggling in this life. 48% of these mass shooters, Shug, and for your listeners, a mass shooter FBI data is 4 or more people killed. 48% of these mass shooters have a term that criminologists call leakage. And we saw this even in the Annunciation school shooting. They've either told someone what they intend to do, they've either posted online, it's in a manifesto, or their behaviors are so clear and obvious, everyone around them is saying that this person is on a pathway to violence. So when we look as to what we can do as a society around these mass shootings, 48% are communicating what they intend to do. So listening, understanding, and leaning into some of those challenging conversations, that if someone looks like they've got mental illness, or if it looks like the devil is encroaching in their life, we've got to do what we can to help them. So for me, it's less about the person, the physical appearance of the individual. It's more around what are those traits that we see consistently, and it's they've suffered trauma and abuse. There's a fascination with other mass shooters, they're suicidal, they've got profound mental illness. Those are the things where we can help people in society to try and eliminate this sort of epidemic that we seem to be seeing in the United States.
Even in the Charlie Kirk assassination, there was leakage there as well as he was communicating with his roommates. So you talk about the intervention ladder of leakage, which is notice, reflect, engage, report, connect. Friends, pick up the book, find out the details on that, find out what he's looking for and what you should be looking for as well. So that brings me to the next question. How do we intervene?
Yeah, I think the intervention is challenging, and here's why. I think there's so much mental illness. The spiritual warfare is, I would say, as a Christian man, the strongest it's ever been. I think, we are, our Christian views and stances are never, I mean, I think every generation maybe says this, Shug, but I can't think of a generation that's been under attack as much as where we are right now with
I agree.
Christianity.
I
But
agree.
I think how do we intervene is we have to get to these people, what I would say, left of the bang. So get to them before they all leave. God gave us free will, and some of us struggle with that free will. But our body language, going back to the situation awareness, our body language and who we are give away so many clues. Remember, 48% of these have leakage. So I think the intervention comes from listening. I think it comes from observing. And I think it comes from the challenge to say, Sugar, are you doing okay? Because you've been saying some things that a bit unusual, or you've never said that stuff before. I want to just take a moment to unpack some of that stuff, Sugar, and just listen to where you are. So I think we have to ask questions. Sometimes with mental illness, or whether it's spiritual warfare, we become too hesitant to challenge and have these conversations. But I think the intervention comes from being open and leaning into that person and say, Simon, it looks like you're struggling right now. You've been saying some different things. What can I do to help you? Because we're trying to get them left. So I think the intervention for us is being honest and being gracious enough to lean into that person's life and tell them, but I see you're not yourself right now, and what can I do to help you? Because a lot of people with mental illness, if you ask them, they will tell you. So I think in society we're tending to sort of back away from some of these difficult conversations, where I think the Lord is saying, no, Simon, lean into that conversation and tell that person you see them, you hear them, and you wanna help them. Yeah.
Yeah. In a non-confrontational way, because that person
Yes.
could be dangerous. And
Yeah.
I think when you talked about leakage as well in your book, you also had mentioned that sometimes it's a cry to stop
Yeah.
me,
Yes. Yeah.
stop me from those actions and those movements.
Yeah,
I'm
you see
gonna,
that in a lot of people. Just one quick story about that.
sure.
The AME church shooting in 2015. A young kid, 21 years old, went to a church, killed 9 people. He actually said during his FBI interview, I went there and I was looking for someone to talk me out of it, and no
Mm,
one did. So he
mhm.
talked himself into it, and then he killed 9 lives. So
Yeah.
it may have been different if someone has said, young man, you look like you're struggling right now.
Mhm.
How can I help you? He said he was looking for someone to talk him out of it, and when no one did, he took out his gun and killed 9 people. Tragic,
Yeah.
tragic.
It is, and it's evil. And you all know Shugbury, this is what I do. I love the Lord. I love Jesus Christ. He saved me from the pit of hell. And I got to tell you, he can do the same for you as well. But I think you need to understand that the enemy is alive and well, and he wants to play with our children and play in their hearts. And he knows the trigger points for each person. And I think what's important, friends, is that you understand you have the power, the authority, and the ability to cast out those demons if you see them. And I have done this. I have watched it firsthand. And you claim the power God has given you and you believe in it. In the name of Jesus Christ, get out. Now, you don't have to say that to their face. You can say that through prayer. I mean, prayer moves mountains. And so I think it's important to understand you have authority in Jesus Christ if this person is demon possessed. And that's really what this is boiling down to. How can you not watch these shootings and wonder, um, this has got to be the enemy, which it is. And so I think it's really important that we can pray those things. We can pray and lift up our power and our authority in Jesus Christ. Sorry about that, Simon. I get off on my
No,
bandwagon on that,
I agree. It's all good stuff. Yeah.
but it's really important. And I have watched multiple times in the name of Jesus Christ and believing in that name, people literally melt. They were demon possessed one minute, and the next minute they just melt um, with the power of Jesus Christ. Now, did they accept Jesus Christ? Not necessarily, but it's the power of Jesus Christ. And scripture says even the demons know Jesus Christ's power and feared it. And so I think that's important for all of us to learn. Get in your word, friends. Invite Jesus Christ into your life. Realize you are a sinner. And maybe you've been a toy for Satan all these years. And now it's time to rise up in Jesus Christ and claim the person God had created you to be. Simon, I love that you had said this was not God's plan for their life.
Yeah.
God's plan was to give them a purpose and a hope and not to harm them. And the enemy can make a sideways direction. You look at the Charlie Kirk assassin. They talked about everything was going well in this young man's life, and somehow he took a left-hand turn, and things
Yeah.
had changed dramatically. And so I'm going to encourage you, friends, discover you the power that you have in Jesus Christ. Research the power you have in Jesus Christ, and it can be done in your child's lives, in prayer, or at that moment. When you're hiding under a pew or wherever you happen to be, you can claim the power of Jesus Christ, and that enemy would be bound. And also listen to all the things Simon said, which are super important. We have to wrap it up here, Simon. Do you have a few last words of wisdom for us?
Yeah, I mean, we've echoed throughout. Shug is lead with preparedness, not with fear.
Mm-hmm.
And as a father to young boys, I don't want to have these difficult conversations, but I think we have to, because this is about preparing them.
Mm-hmm.
What does Jesus say? Shug is train a child up in the way it should go, and he won't depart from it. So I think this is about giving them the tips and tools when you're not there as a parent. It's giving them the tips and tools to stay safe. So it's a challenging conversation, and start small. You'd have to go straight into the world is a crazy place, and always
Mm-hmm.
going from. You can just start with, hey, when you're going to the mall, when you're going to the movie theater with your friends, let's just think about some simple things that you can do to stay safe, and then just start there. But I would encourage parents to have this conversation, because if you read my book and you listen to the story of Meredith Eliza Day, she lost her only 14-year-old son, and there's a lot of things that she wishes that she'd perhaps done differently, or what she'd said that day. So very powerful. Yeah. Thank you, Shug.
Yeah, the book is powerful, friends. And if you're on YouTube, you can see it, How to Survive a Mass Shooting with Simon Osamoh. And I do ask that you reach out to him if you want him to speak at your events. At Kingswood Security Consulting is where you can find his website, team@kingswoodsc.com. And there's a phone number on here at 612-389-2244. 612-389-2244. And please share with us, Simon, how can we be praying for you? And you're doing a ministry is what you're doing. How can we pray for you and your ministry?
I think if you can, sometimes, these are deep subjects, and I have to be the person that goes and talks about this subject. So I think if the listeners can just pray that God gives me the wisdom, God gives me the courage and the energy to have these conversations, because the audience hear it once. I have to hear it every week as I talk to someone about this. So it can be very, very heavy on your heart. And I was interviewed by some news crews after the Annunciation School shooting. I actually went to the school, and, it affects, I'm a security expert, but these things affect me as well. So if they can just pray for me as I continue this ministry, helping people, and the awareness around how to survive.
And protection for you and your family. Thank you so much, Simon. And we will definitely be lifting you up in prayer. Friends, if you have not asked Jesus into your heart, maybe today's the day, because you can clearly see good and evil. And Jesus tells us that he is preparing a room for us for that day that we can be reunited with him again. Simon, we're so blessed to have had you on, and I hope and pray that you come back again and give us any updates. I'm Shug Burry. You know I love you. Over and out.